Well, I know you've been a big study of economics and business, and have been in the market, stock market, for almost all your life, and advice and doing that kind of stuff. What do you think it's going to take for South Carolina to come out? What do we need to do to position ourselves to be geared to come out of this recession so that we can become a force from an economic development standpoint, a force from creation of jobs? What's it going to take?
I'll go back and use Friedman again. Friedman's latest book is Friedman 3.0, which is not about a flat world, but basically the contention that says that about the time you come up with a good idea, given the fact there's 6.5 billion people on planet Earth, somebody else comes up with that same great idea on the opposite side of the world. Right. And his point is that the civilizations, the states, the countries, the communities that allow an individual to act faster on that idea than the guy on the opposite part of the world are the places that win. And what that is to say is we need to be about the business of unleashing individual initiative. And that comes down to regulatory climate. It comes down to tax system and tax climate. It comes down to a lot of things that really are about getting government out of the way. So I think that you need that. You need a competitive playing field from which to operate, and that goes to the very heart of cost structure, which is something that businesses are dealing with on a daily basis. And one of the things that we're burdened with in South Carolina is, we have a relatively high sales tax relative to a lot of other places around the country, and we have an absolutely high marginal income tax rate relative to a lot of other places. And so, that's just not that competitive a place from which to do business. And the resources that we do have in many cases are duplicated by nature of the system itself. And so it's one thing to be 130% the U.S. average in the cost of doing business, but you put 130% emphasis on some key things. But we don't do that. We sort of spread around the marble. We're very good at spreading marbles to make sure everybody gets a marble. You can't compete unless you do what is done on a daily basis in priority investing in the things that will make the biggest difference. And so I think that this notion of structure really comes to the heart of that for the way that it also impacts the very competitiveness of our people and our businesses.
Talking about, last question, talking about marginal tax rates and position that you've had on income taxes, and making sure that if any taxes increase, you have a decrease in another area. I know that the business communities work pretty hard on trying to find some type of health care incentive to small businesses and trying to come up with a way of maximizing the number of federal dollars that come into the state, trying to get them back to businesses to keep from the cost shift going to businesses that can provide health care now. If we get the cigarette tax across the goal line and get an increase and provide small business health care, have you thought about that in the context of where you've been in the past and the possibility of letting that go and providing health care benefits to people in the small business, to their employees?
Well, I'd love to do it. In its present form, I'd veto it because it's not revenue neutral, one. So what we said from day one is, look, all taxes are not created equally. And in as much as you increase one, let's decrease somewhere else. We think it's a great idea to increase the cigarette tax and applaud the Chamber's efforts on that front because it makes no sense to be lowest in the nation, which is where we happen to be. I think it makes a lot of sense to raise a tax like that and decrease one that ties more to competitiveness issues. But it's, not revenue neutral. In other words, there's more tax that comes in than goes out in its present form. And I think that one of the things that also ought to be looked at in that one is what you want to make sure of when you do something like that is it's something that indeed goes to help the small businesses that you're alluding to, and not one that becomes a subsidy for large corporations, insurance, and other. And some of that, at least as our policymakers, policy folks looked at it, could be basically splintered off in the form of a subsidy to insurance companies rather than direct subsidy to individual taxpayers. I'd always fall in the camp that says great effort, but isn't there a way to make sure that those dollars get back to the people that pay the taxes? In other words, if you're going to increase the taxes on the people that pay the taxes, can the benefit go back to the people paying the taxes?
Well, Governor, we thank you for sitting down with us and talking a little bit today. I think the things you said have been right on point, very informative as far as our membership goes, and we thank you for what you do for the state of South Carolina. We thank you for your convictions. You know, it's a political process, and what individual people believe, it can be debated all across the board. But thank you for sitting down with me today, and I'm sure our membership will find it very interesting.